Hello and welcome to the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. I'm your host, Sean Zerillo, joined today by Billy Ward. That means it's time for another UFC betting preview. We're here to break down UFC 299 going live from Miami, Florida, featuring bantamweight title matchup between Sean O'Malley and Chito Vera, rematch from 2020, which Vera took and at very similar odds. But before we get started, the great state of North Carolina is launching sports betting this Monday, March 11th. So if you're in the Tar Heel state, take advantage of the best sign-up offers across every sportsbook. You can find a link to every one of those offers in the description of this episode. All the North Carolinas in one place. Check out the link in the episode description to make sure to take advantage of those offers if you're betting in North Carolina. Billy, let's talk about the main event. Chito Vera, Sean O'Malley ran this back from a few years ago. Chito won after first round leg kick led to drop foot for O'Malley. He ended up falling. Chito got on top, pounded him out with some elbows. O'Malley may have even gone unconscious for a second. Pretty scary moment after that. Chito's debated, or O'Malley and Chito have debated the quality of that finish, whether Chito actually caused the damage that led to that finish. We've seen O'Malley deal with a similar issue in another fight against Andre Shukmantov, where he ended up on bottom in the third round and basically just had a drop foot and couldn't stand on his leg and couldn't get up. So something that's always going to pop up in Sean O'Malley fights. Have to be concerned about that potentially popping up again. In terms of how this fight plays out, in terms of how this matchup plays out, I bet Chito the first time at around this price, plus 225. Interested in betting him again, but I actually think you're going to get a better price live than you will pre-fight. If you're betting a pre-fight, I like Chito inside the distance, about 4-1, projected that closer to 3-1. I like Chito in the finish-only market at plus 140. Little tip there, getting plus 140 domestically. The offshore market for that prop sitting minus 135 in favor of Chito. I think he should be favored in the finish-only market, and I think getting plus money on Chito to be the one to finish the fight, and you push if that fight goes to a decision, I think that's the best way to play this fight. But I also like Chito live quite a bit, and I know Billy likes that as well. Live after round one, live after round two. Chito is a notoriously slow starter, and O'Malley is actually a pretty quick starter. This is more so about Chito starting slow, especially in his 5-round fights. His past 3 main events, he's been outstruck 110-40 across the first round. Likes to start slow, keep a high guard, get his reads. He's not going to absorb a lot of damage, but in terms of the optics for the judges, it's going to look like he's getting doubled or tripled up in terms of strikes. He's going to keep those gloves up. O'Malley's going to bounce a lot of punches off of those gloves, but very similar to the Brandon Moreno fight in Mexico City. That output, even if it's bouncing off the gloves, is still going to favor the guy throwing more. So I think O'Malley pulls ahead in the first round pretty consistently, wins that first round at probably an 80 or 90% clip. That second round should become a little bit closer as Chito opens up. Probably make that round about 60-40 in favor of O'Malley. And then by the third round, I think things become much closer to 50-50, if not outright favor Chito down the stretch. Probably the most important factor in this fight. Chito's been 5 rounds on multiple occasions, and his style gets better over the course of 5 rounds. He really picks things up in the 4th and 5th round and becomes much more dangerous. Has great cardio and tremendous durability, and I expect him to survive to the 5th round unless he finishes O'Malley first. On the other end of the spectrum, O'Malley, a bit noodly, smaller legs. Definitely think those legs can get kicked again, that he can get hurt there. And he's also never proven his cardio beyond the 15-minute mark. He looked really good in the 3rd round against Petr, but there's other fights where he's slowing down. And it's very possible that Chito, as he's accelerating into the later rounds, if O'Malley's slowing down just a touch, it may really favor Chito later on in this fight. So Chito live, I think the best approach. Chito finish only, I think the other best approach for this fight. And inside the distance as well, the 3 ways I'm betting it. O'Malley should win the early minutes. I think Chito rallies and makes this one close and interesting late. Would probably lean to O'Malley taking that decision just because of the early minute winning upside. And that's why I really like that finish-only market for Chito in this fight, but could absolutely finish things early in the fight as he did in the last matchup. And Billy, you're taking Chito on the money line, but also targeting the live angle.
Yeah, there's a few parts to this. I took Chito at plus 240 earlier in the week. I had that in my luck ratings. I'm kind of torn, honestly, if I didn't get that line, whether I would still play the plus 220 or just wait for the live, because the live feels just so incredibly obvious here. But one thing you mentioned is, they've gone back and forth debating that injury and whether that was a legitimate win or whether it was something that came in. You could kind of do the same thing about all of O'Malley's last 3 fights, right? So he had the eye poke against Pedro Munhoz, but Munhoz was winning the first round on 2 out of 3 judges when that fight got stopped. Poirier and O'Malley won a split decision, like pretty widely regarded as a very bad decision. You check out MMA decisions, any of those resources. Kind of everyone says that should have gone to Jan. And then Aljamain Sterling, he knocked him out. So I'm not saying he didn't finish that fight. But, Sterling was saying he wasn't ready to fight. He didn't want to take the fight at that date. It wasn't a good time for him. He got kind of forced into it. You can kind of go through his record and say, like, who is he really beaten at a high level that there's not some major question marks about? So that's what initially put me on Chito. And yeah, on top of that, just the live is so obvious with the way both these guys fight. O'Malley might have good cardio, kind of a leaner guy, doesn't burn out a ton of energy. We don't know. I'm kind of inclined to believe, just as a general principle in MMA, if we're saying that XXX is a question mark on a guy's resume, that it's probably a question mark because he avoids it because he's not that great at it. That's not always going to be right. And we're going to talk about some fighters where we think that's wrong later on. But, until I'm proven wrong, I'm going to believe that it's probably not a strong suit for him at the very least. So, yeah, you're almost certainly going to get a better price on Chito after the first round. I got no problem with the plus 220, no problem with any of the stuff you said, but definitely live betting is the ideal way to play this.
Yeah, I mean, the UFC basically protected Sean O'Malley from being able to prove that cardio. The first main event slot that they gave him, I believe, was the Sterling fight. And that was the first 5-round fight that they actually booked him for. So he finished that fight. Credit to him. He was also losing that first round. And, he wasn't given the chance to prove his cardio because aside from the Petr Yan fight, which he lost the majority of that fight, maybe there's an argument that he edged out 2 of the rounds. But if you take the majority of the fight, if he scored under pride rules, he probably loses that fight. He's had an awkward run, and I do think this is a good matchup for him just because of Chito's willingness to cede minutes. Chito isn't this, he hits hard. He's probably one of the harder hitters or more dangerous strikers that O'Malley's faced. It's not like he's this vicious, murderous power puncher. It's probably going to end up in a close decision. The fight is essentially lined to reach a decision. We'll see if it gets there, but I think if it does, it's probably has a chance of being a split, and the third round may be super determinative of the momentum swing, and how that third round is scored may be determinative of the winner if it does end up reaching the scorecards. There is another 5-round fight on this card though, and another fight involving a favorite who has not proven his cardio across 25 minutes. Benoit Saint-Denis, podcast favorite. Man, oh man, there was once upon a time we were getting plus 260 on Benoit Saint-Denis against Gabriel Bonfim. Now you're basically getting a similar price on Dustin Poirier against Benoit Saint-Denis. I do like Saint-Denis in this fight. I don't love the price. I think I can justify laying it even at this number, but I don't want to. I'd probably prefer the under 2.5 here at minus 115. I've seen Saint-Denis get steamed, and I've seen the over 1.5 rounds get steamed. And to me, those outcomes aren't necessarily correlated to one another. I would tend to think that a longer fight favors Dustin Poirier, who has been 5 rounds in the past, who looked great in the back end of his fight against Dan Hooker. Got roughed up early, was down on the scorecards, ended up rallying back and looking like the fresher man down the stretch. Now, the one problem with Poirier is he does not face grapplers particularly often. The last grappler he really faced, Michael Chandler, who he ended up submitting, was holding him down and controlling him for big portions of that fight until he gassed out and Dustin got the neck and choked him out. But I think he's going to really struggle with the pace and pressure of Saint-Denis. Saint-Denis tries to fight like a lightweight Merab Dvalishvili, throws a big body kick, enters the pocket, gets in the clinch, and then just starts going to work on you. And even though this guy's only been training MMA for 6 years, it seems like he has been grappling longer than that. He's in the French Special Forces. I'm sure he was doing some sort of grappling when he was in the military, just because his jiu-jitsu and his whole game, the coherence of his game seems to be much more developed than a guy who's only been fighting for 6 years. Billy, I'm sure you could assess that better than I can, but doesn't have the best hands, has a really good body kick, and uses that body kick to get in where he wants to in order to start the grappling. And from there, he's really tough to get off of you. The pace, the pressure tends to melt his opponents. He's finished every opponent inside the distance. I like him to win this fight inside the distance at minus 150. Projected that closer to minus 175, minus 180. So I think you can justify playing that instead of his money line. And he's got 25 minutes to get it done. I show slight value on his knockout prop as well, Billy. I know that's a bet that you like for this fight, but I'm probably going with the under 2.5 here at minus 115 for my favorite way to play it. As I said, the over 1.5 getting juiced up. This pace should be absolutely chaotic. And I think BSD is going to give Poirier a lot of opportunities to land boxing as he's coming in and potentially get a lot of opportunities to get Dustin's back and finish with the choke. You like BSD in this fight too, Billy?
I do. And, what really concerned me when I started looking for it, Poirier's coming off a bad knockout. It was 7 months ago. I'm not worried about the turnaround time on that knockout specifically. What I am worried about is, he's a lightweight over 35, which we always talk about. There's all the stats. Had 37 professional fights, 3 knockout losses. A lot of those, even that he won, he took a lot of damage. I don't know that we see Dustin Poirier kind of ever recover to what he was following that knockout by Justin Gaethje. Like, I'm not sure that knockout or that kick would have knocked him out even a few years ago, is the other factor there. So, yeah, I just don't trust his durability at this point. BSD, not a great technical striker, but he throws everything hard, especially head kicks with his, power leg coming from the rear. I like the knockout angle because he can grapple his way into a knockout. Poirier is a BJJ black belt, probably not going to be submitted. He's been submitted a couple times, but he's been submitted by Charles Oliveira, Khabib Nurmagomedov, and I don't know, somebody bad like a million years ago when he was starting out. We're going to look past a little bit for the sake of my argument. BSD's got some good submissions. Obviously does some grappling like you pointed out. I trained with some like Marine Corps guys every once in a while, and they come in kind of like blue belt level with the stuff that they learn. I'd imagine French Special Forces is even a step beyond that with their skill set. And then on the other hand of that,
is probably knife fighting and also jiu-jitsu at the same time.
Yeah, but even that, you're holding the guy down, right? You want to knife fight a guy from on top of him, not from off your back. So there's something to that, I think. But and then if you don't see that in the first couple of rounds, he does some damage. Maybe I'm wrong on Poirier's chin. I think it is a good spot to go live on Poirier as well. Not only have we not seen BSD over an extended period of time, that level of aggression, you called him a lightweight Marab, carrying all that extra muscle. I can't imagine that holds up well in the 4th and 5th rounds. There's some guys that it does. It kind of defies all logic. They are very few and far between. If he fought a more cautious style, if he fought more like Poirier, staying in the pocket, boxing, kind of conserving his energy, maybe it would hold up. But between his body type and his fighting style, I have a lot of doubts about his cardio. And yeah, you're pointing out the line movement is kind of like negatively correlated. Places where you can parlay, BSD and under whatever round you want to pick, Poirier and over if you want to do this pre-fight. I think there's an angle to that too. I'd rather just wait for the live. You can get as high as plus 340 on BSD by knockout, which seems longer than it should be to me. And then if you get Poirier coming back live at plus 200 or something later in the fight, you're kind of good almost every way it goes.
Let's talk about our fight of the night. Kevin Holland and Michael Venom Page, MVP joining the UFC. A bit older than I would have liked to see him come over, coming off of a loss to Michael Perry in bare knuckle fighting championship as well. So absorbed some damage with some bare knuckles outside of MMA gloves. And he's complained a little bit about the UFC gloves and not necessarily loving the fit of them, which, I think is an interesting factor to consider. Just if these two end up grappling, like being unfamiliar with the glove, a bit less comfortable with it. Maybe you don't have grip strength that you normally would. But Holland, 5 years younger, has the reach advantage here, 2-inch reach advantage. And he's also the better grappler. And I don't necessarily know if he's going to pursue the grappling, but you still do need to bake it into the handicap. And that makes Holland the justifiable favorite, more output, longer, and also the grappling upside in addition to the youth advantage. Technically, I think Page is a better striker, but Holland just, is going to have more output. Ultimately, this probably ends if Holland decides to strike it out by split decision. And I do like the fight to go to a decision at minus 150. Think, Page throws a lot of power behind his shots, but Holland is a pretty durable guy. I think the likeliest way this one finishes is Holland via submission. And I don't know if he's likely to pursue the grappling. So I like this to go to a decision at minus 150. Billy, I know you like a side on the money line. But yeah, I'd take either fighter by decision if I was poking the props or just the fight GTD.
Yeah, I do like Michael Venom Page here. And there's a few parts to it. The first, as you pointed out, Holland should have a grappling advantage. Michael Page doesn't offensively grapple at all. He, I forget the guy's name, but he fought a, 4-time D1 All-American, got taken down. Yeah, there you go. And he was able to get up almost every time. He wasn't taking a lot of damage. In a perfect world, or in the world that I'd like to live in, if you're getting taken down a bunch of times and don't do anything on your feet, you should still lose the round. That has not been what we've seen in the UFC lately. You're almost penalized for takedowns if you don't do enough with it. So that's, part one. Part two, I think there's a little bit of UFC bias baked into this line. I have to imagine that people, they just think that everything else is a step below the UFC. And to a degree, that's the right angle. I don't know if that necessarily holds up at the high end, especially with someone like MVP. And then the last one, though, is just, if it were anyone other than Kevin Holland who had a grappling edge, I'd say, sure, that's worth baking into the line. Kevin Holland frequently has a grappling edge and frequently lets guys up to continue getting beat up like we saw against Thompson. I think Wonderboy is actually kind of an interesting comparison for this fight. Both have the traditional martial arts styles, hands low, looking to counter and react, except Michael Page is like 4,000 times more athletic than Stephen Thompson. He's just a faster, quicker, more explosive version of that. So given how Holland struggled on the feet, given that we know Holland doesn't make good decisions, for lack of a better term, and then sneaky one here, this is in Miami. If anyone's out here partying the night before the fight, having a good time, it might just be Kevin Holland. It's kind of like the visiting team in the NBA when they go to Miami for the first time all year. You got to bake that in. I'm mostly kidding on that angle, but like, really, if there's anyone on this card who's going to be not as focused as they should be, that's probably also Kevin Holland. So slight plus money on MVP. I'm seeing plus 115. Wouldn't go much beyond that. I do think it's likely enough to go to a decision. I agree with your take. I think MVP's probably got the better odds of stopping it here, just given his explosive ability, weird kicks and stuff like that. So if you're playing MVP, I'm not playing him by decision because his knockout equity needs to be baked into that line for me to take it. But if you're, not convinced by his side, I also agree with that. Holland is very durable. Like, the only TKO was against Thompson, but that was more because his hand was broken. So don't think that we can necessarily bank on that repeating.
Yeah, he was having a lot of success in that fight against Thompson until he broke his hand. I think it was the big punch he landed in the first round was what ultimately broke it, and he sort of wilted away from there. He just doesn't shoot takedowns that often, and it seemed like in the Thompson fight they almost had a gentleman's agreement that they weren't going to grapple. He would land a takedown to sort of break up the pressure, and then he would let Stephen Thompson up. And there's a chance that he signed a behind the scenes contract with the UFC here and agreed to strike it out with Page and not go for takedowns. Could be a fun fight.
No, to that point,
yeah.
Like, I think Kevin Holland knows why they made this matchup, right? Like, he's not dumb. He's like, oh, they brought me in to fight Michael Venom Page so I could put on a wrestling clinic and try to hold him against the cage for 15 minutes. That's not what he's about. That's not why they made this matchup. I think everyone knows what the score is here. He could shock me, but like literally nothing we've ever seen from Kevin Holland would suggest he's all of a sudden going to try to win at any cost rather than be fun and be Kevin Holland.
Yeah, he's a company man. He's getting paid to be entertaining, not to go out and win fights and go on a title run. So I think Kevin Holland being paid here knows the moment, knows the debut opponent he's getting. He's not going to be taking down Michael Venom Page and have the crowd in Miami booing at him. Everybody wants to see these two strike it out. He should oblige those intentions. Let's go to our favorite underdogs of the night. Billy, you're going with another main card fight, Gilbert Burns against Della Maddalena. I think we were both on Basil Hafez at a huge price the last time Della Maddalena fought. Almost cashed that ticket. Feel like we've had a number of underdogs recently that were good bets that ultimately did not cash. Taking another shot against Della here.
Well, I will say, not to toot my own horn too much, I took the plus 3.5 rounds on Basil, so I still cashed the ticket at like not quite the same price. I think it was like plus 850 money line, and I got like plus 300 on the spread, but just by virtue of him winning a round. But no, I was thinking about it, and I'm the guy that does the luck ratings and looks back at split decisions and weird outcomes caused by injury. And then you look back, both of JDM's last two wins were split decisions, one over Kevin Holland, one over Basil Hafez. Don't really disagree with any of them, but it's still telling us he's not just mauling people on his way to fighting the top 10. It's kind of the theme of this card is we have a guy, back end of the rankings, young guy coming up, fighting this established title contender. The other ones have been much more dominant on their run to the top. I'm counting Jailton Almeida, we'll talk about, counting BSD. Those guys have been extremely dominant against lower-level competition. Della Maddalena is kind of sneaking by on some split decisions. And then on the other side, Gilbert Burns' last loss was against Bilal Muhammad. Took that fight on less than a month and tore his shoulder what seemed to be 2 minutes into the fight. So that doesn't really tell us that he couldn't have won that fight, had he been at full strength. Just kind of like a systems play or whatever for me. When you got a guy coming down 2 split decision wins as a favorite, other guy coming in on a questionable loss as an underdog, feels like I can't not take that one at plus 145.
And Burns' massive grappling upside here, not only in terms of finishing the fight, getting a submission, but also just holding Jack down for extended stretches. I really didn't like the looks from Jack in the Hafez fight where Hafez was clearly shooting in, and instead of trying to move away or avoid the takedown, Jack was literally standing his ground and just winging hooks in the center of the cage. He was accepting the takedowns. Now, Gilbert Burns is not as aggressive pursuing the takedown, doesn't have the best cardio, tends to manage it a little bit more, so not going to pursue those takedowns as aggressively, may not even get them as successfully. I don't think he's the best wrestler, But if he does get this fight to the ground, he may only need one to finish it. I mean, this guy is one of the best submission grapplers in the UFC. Obviously did not look great in his last fight against Bilal Muhammad. I think we can give him a slight pass for the injury he sustained in that fight, in addition to the short notice. But I also think he's on the back end of his career and is declining, whereas Jack Della is the better athlete, younger, and certainly improving on the way up. I like this fight to go under -150 to the under 2.5 rounds. I think Burns could absolutely land a knockout, threatening a takedown. Jack drops his hands. Burns has huge power. Wobbled Kamaru Usman could absolutely hurt Jack, knock him out. If he gets this fight on the ground, absolutely think he can get a submission. But also, Burns is not the most durable guy. Jack is really crisp boxing, so could definitely see Jack knocking Burns out fairly quickly too. Under 2.5, I think, is an interesting look here. Burns by submission. The other way I'd probably play it. In terms of my favorite underdog, I actually have an underdog for my best bet on this card. So going to save my quote-unquote favorite underdog for later. But what other underdog I really like, may bet him pre-fight, definitely going to bet him live. That's Pedro Munhoz. This guy typically underrated by the betting markets. Now, similar to Chito Vera, he is at a disadvantage in terms of the boxing, and he's probably going to fall behind just by virtue of not landing as many head strikes as Kyler Phillips. Kyler Phillips, the better athlete than Munhoz, much quicker, but does not have as good of cardio as Munhoz. And also, Munhoz is going to be employing more of an attritional game plan where he's going to be hammering the legs, trying to get Phillips to slow down later in the fight, potentially having more success in the second and third round. So I'm a little bit interested in Munhoz pre-fight, but I actually expect more of his success to be backloaded here. I like him to put in attritional work early and for those dividends to pay off later. So Pedro Munhoz, potentially a pre-fight bet. Definitely love him live after round one. Think he could take the second and third rounds as Phillips is potentially slowing down. Billy, any thoughts on Munhoz?
Yeah, I was tempted to just play his money line earlier in the week. I'm not entirely sold on Kyler Phillips. Again, another one, as we've kind of seen, Munhoz, the old vet, been near the top of the division. Kyler Phillips coming up fast. And actually, I think more worried about Kyler Phillips grappling than anything else. And I've said it before in the past, got made fun of by our esteemed producer, Matt Mitchell, but really hard to keep taking a guy down who doesn't want to be there and hold him down. So if it looks like Kyler's selling out for takedowns and burning a lot of energy, I think that makes a lot of sense on your angle. I think that I'm not worried about Munhoz in the boxing. I think he should actually probably be at least as good of a boxer here. I do worry about if Kyler is able to control him on the ground, but it's kind of just going to be a live read for me on whether it looks like he gassed himself out doing that or got some smooth takedowns and made the other guy carry his weight the whole round.
We've covered the rest of the main card, done a pretty good job with it here. There is one fight that we have not talked about, though. Petr Yan against Song Yadong. Pretty big fight in the bantamweight division. Yan, former champion. Song Yadong, potential future title contender. Yan -125, probably getting a discount based on their past results. The fact that Yan is a former champion, I think he is the better fighter, but this is still a 3-round fight. And Yan, like Chito Vera, traditionally starts very slow, gets his reads in the first round, and then eventually picks up the pace. To Chito's credit, his last fight, he did starts faster. I believe that was, again, Pedro Munhoz. He started faster and actually won the first round on all 3 scorecards. Curious to see if Yan finally makes that adjustment and starts a little bit quicker here. I believe he lost the first round on 2 out of 3 scorecards to Sean O'Malley. Even though he had some success there, that round was still closer than it should have been. And if Yan just lets his hands go a little bit more in the first round, he probably wins that fight. So Yan, a slow starter. I think I'm kind of interested in whoever's trailing here live after round one, or especially if it's a close first round and you can get somebody at plus money live after round one. I'll probably take whoever's trailing between Yan and Yadong. I think this fight probably goes to split decision at a very high clip. Yadong, better power, better athlete, but Yan just is the better technical fighter, and I think he's going to land more. The shots just may not look quite as effective to the judges. So I think this is going to be one that's very difficult to score. This was a 25-minute fight. Would absolutely be taking Yan at -125. I think the margins for him are just too narrow in 3-round fights to cover any sort of favorite price tag in a fight that should be extremely competitive. Lean to the over fight to go to decision. It's very juiced up. You have to pay about -250 or higher in order to bet that. So probably going to end up passing on this fight. May live bet whoever's down after round one. Billy, do you have any thoughts on Song Yadong and Petr Yan?
Yeah, haven't bet this one myself yet. Might still get there. I think Yan is the correct money line side just based on the movement against him so much, but his only 4 losses in the UFC, DQ against Aljo, fight he was probably winning. Split decision loss against Aljo, debatable. Highly debatable loss against Sean O'Malley, also split decision. And then Merab. Merab does that to everyone. Like, you don't lose any points for getting dominated on the ground by Merab, right? So I think he's probably the correct money line side. I kind of look at it as a fairly binary early versus late fight here, where I think Yadong needs a knockout or a finish or at least a huge moment early on. Less active striker, throws with less volume. Far less grappling than from Jan, far less takedowns per round, but bigger power. So I think, as of now, I would play some combination of Yadong early and Jan late, or as you're pointing out in the live markets, I do think Yadong looks good early. If he has that big moment, it's going to inflate the line on Jan tremendously. So that's probably the sharper way as you're pointing it out. Don't think I would live bet Yadong, though, even if he falls behind. Because if Jan starts strong and we know he builds, it's almost like it's only going to go one direction from where we see on Jan. So if you got to do it pre-fight, Jan decision, Jan over a certain number of rounds, something like that. Or other side, Song Yadong, knockout, finish, first couple of rounds, something like that. But yeah, the live angle is probably, this is like the third time we're saying this card, but the live angle is probably the way to handle this one.
No, I think the only scenario in which I'd live bet Song is if I think there's a chance he won the first round and his price blows out. Like if he's plus 200 after round one, and I'm like, I think there's, a chance two judges gave it to him if it's a close round. That's probably the only scenario in which I bet him. I think you're right. Otherwise, I'd probably be looking to target Jan at the same price or better than he is pre-fight. Going to go ahead and rearrange, our top props and best bets here, just so it's a bit more coherent, because there's a couple of fights in common that we want to talk about. The first of which is Robelis Despaigne against Josh Parisian. Robelis Despaigne, the big boy, biggest reach in UFC history, 84-inch reach, 6'7" heavyweight. I think he's an Olympic bronze medalist in Taekwondo from Cuba. Loves the head kick. Past 3 wins have all come in 20 seconds or less. I think 20 seconds combined, his past 3 wins.
12 seconds or less on each other.
And against completely untested competition. I think one of his opponents has faced one other opponent and nobody else has fought in MMA. So we don't know anything about Robelis Despaigne other than the fact that he's really tall and really good at kicking people in the head. I think this fight to end inside the first 2.5 minutes, the under 0.5 rounds at plus 200, is kind of a fun way to bet it, because that does seem like the majority of Despaigne's win condition. Alternatively, the fight to end in round one is juiced up to like minus 200. So you're getting a bit more of a bump on the first half of the first round instead of getting the entirety of the first round. Billy, I think you like Josh Parisian to potentially survive here and then turn the tables.
Yeah, you're setting me up for failure here. I'm taking a plus 1,300, flyer on Josh Parisian. Don't at me when he gets knocked out in 20 seconds. I understand that's that's the likeliest outcome here. Parisian is definitely not a great athlete by UFC standards, one of the lower level heavyweights. With that said, he's still a jiu-jitsu brown belt who's been competing in MMA for 15 years, trains under my buddy James Gray out in Brighton, which is like a grappling-focused school they have there at Scorpion Fighting System. There's a reason we've never seen another Taekwondo Olympian in the UFC. This is the very first one. They carry their hands low, they get points for touching, they're not allowed to punch to the head, and there's zero grappling. None of that is a great setup for, MMA. I grew up doing Taekwondo, so I'm not just, bad-mouthing it for no reason. Despaign's athletic advantage will probably mean that Parisian can't take him down, and then it ends for Parisian fast. But what if he does? Because this guy has no ground game that we've ever seen. All of his opponents on the regional scene were guys with like boxing and kickboxing backgrounds. Like they were all handpicked to make the big boy look exciting, make the big boy look fun, make him look like a thing. We really don't know. And this is a guy who's 35, who's been training and grappling for like 3 or 4 years. He's effectively like a low-level blue belt at this point. Parisian is actually no slouch on the ground. It's hard for him to get it there, given that he's not the fastest, not the strongest. 13-1 odds on a submission. If he's going to win, I think that's almost how it has to be. If they're on the feet for more than a minute or two, he probably ends up unconscious. I don't know that it would be a smart game plan for Parisian to try to finish him on the ground with strikes when there's such an easily available option with submissions there. So 13-1 odds. No one in the YouTube comments yell at me when he gets knocked out. I understand that's probably what's going to happen. It's 13-1 though, and like that should be his money line. Not quite, but like it should be considerably closer to his money line. Should be the most likely outcome, I think, for Parisian. He ain't gonna win a decision because they stand him up at the start of every round. So,
assuming Parisian live after round one as well.
I don't. What do you mean after round one? There's not going to be an after round one here. Come on, let's get out of here. Yeah, maybe. Honestly, I don't know. Now that you make me think about it, the Taekwondo style, if nothing else, is not very energy intensive. You're flicking out kicks, being fast, kind of darting in and out. It's not like he's a wrestler who's going to burn his tank out. I don't know. Let's hope we don't have to watch more than 1 or 2 rounds of this. I think we're going to know fairly quickly whether Despaigne can defend a takedown, and that's gonna figure it out one way or the other. Yeah, love your pick. If he's going to win it, probably.
Sorry, go ahead, Billy.
No, I say your pick is perfectly, like, getting him in under half round at plus 180. I think if he's going to win, that's probably pretty likely how that happens as well. Like, we're going to know.
You could play that in a same game parlay as well, juice it up just a little bit further, but I think the under 1.5 or the under half round at plus 180 probably fine enough. You could also bet first minute finish at some books as well, so make sure to take a look for that. Just if Despaigne wins, it's probably going to be on the first exchange. Another prop that I like quite a bit, Jailton Almeida by submission at plus 380, or to win in rounds 1 or 2 at plus 200. He doesn't really go for the ground and pound. I think there's a chance, though, that he just catches Curtis Blaydes on the feet. You know, a Curtis Blaydes who is worried about getting taken down. Potentially Jailton lifts up a kick and clips him and knocks him out. Blaydes does not have a good chin. He's also a bit skittish in his recent fights, especially since the Derek Lewis knockout. You know, even his fight against Rosenstrike when he was going for takedowns, Rosenstrike would land a short little hook and tight, and Blaydes was like completely freaking out that he was getting hit. So I just don't love the optics from Curtis Blaydes. I don't love how he's talking in interviews. He seems like he's taken a lot of damage throughout his career. Doesn't seem to just be fully engaged anymore. I think I have a theory actually about Curtis Blaydes that a lot of people who played UFC 4, the video game, still view Curtis Blaydes as its former title challenger because having played the game, Curtis Blaydes was like this impossible heavyweight to beat in terms of video game skills because he's humongous and has this wrestling and clinching ability and you can't do anything with him. And I think for that reason, people kind of overrate his actual skills in real life. He's going to get taken down by Jailton Almeida here. Jailton is the much better athlete. I know he's smaller, but he's the much better athlete. He's freakishly strong, and he's the much better submission grappler. If Blaydes tries to initiate the wrestling, I think Jailton is going to reverse him and end up submitting him. I think Blaydes needs to keep this on the feet, counter grapple. It's what he's talked about doing. He said he needs to employ that kind of Justin Gaethje game plan, counter grapple, keep this on the feet, and knock Jailton out. I like Jailton to turn this into a grappling match and to either win by decision or to likelier submit Curtis Blaydes. So Jailton Almeida by submission at plus 380. I think he gets it done win the first couple of rounds. Billy, you're going with Jailton as your best bet.
Yeah, I took him on the money line. You could get, I think, as high as plus 110 when I did the luck ratings, but you kind of teed up a lot of the reasons why. You know, Blaydes is bigger than Jailton, former light heavyweight. You know, kind of just, I think he saw how much worse the heavyweight division was on the whole and was like, I don't have to cut weight and I get to fight worse guys most of the time. Cool, sign me up. But, you know, Blaydes is bigger, but Blaydes isn't as big as Derek Lewis, and Jailton racked up 21 minutes of control time against Derek Lewis in a 25-minute fight. I know Lewis isn't a great grappler. Nobody does that to Derek Lewis. He kind of just takes his deep breath and gets up. He's been able to do that against pretty much everyone other than Jailton Almeida. The other factor here is, you know, Blaydes wants to keep this standing and try to knock him out. Blaydes has been able to box or strike with the knowledge that his opponents are worried about takedowns and he is not. That has been his whole career. He's been able to, you know, kind of take some wilder swings, step in a little bit more heavy, have more weight on the front leg. All of those things that you don't do when you're worried about the takedown coming back. So if he breaks that habit, I don't know how well his boxing plays against Almeida. And if he doesn't break that habit, he ends up on his back. You could make the similar argument against Jailton where he's never fought another guy with this level of grappling. I don't think it matters, man. Jailton he looks unstoppable. I was talking about it earlier, guys on the way up who've just dominated everyone. The only reason I'm not on your side of things is, as you mentioned, not a lot of ground and pound. He's kind of content to be on top. If you give him a submission, he'll take it. If it's not there, he's just going to win this round. And the way he fought against Derek Lewis, he looked for an arm triangle choke early, and when that wasn't there, kind of never anything else. We could argue that he was kind of just trying to prove to people he can do 5 rounds. I think there's an element of that. But that scared me just enough that against an inferior grappler in Lewis, he didn't see an opportunity, didn't take it. I could see this playing out similarly, especially at, you know, around even money. I got slight plus money earlier in the week. So yeah, it's playing his money line, I think minus 105 or so now. I'd play this down to like minus 130, minus 140. I think he should be a moderate favorite here.
I actually think Derek Lewis's lack of like grappling acumen is what kept him safe in that fight, because he just sort of, he turtled up. He stayed in defensive mount. It was the greatest defensive mount performance in the history of MMA. But Curtis Blaydes is going to actually try to get up or roll over, and I think he's going to put himself in positions to get finished. I doubt he's going to just accept bottom position. There's an ego thing there too, getting out wrestled, getting out grappled. When you consider yourself probably the better wrestler, I'm sure you will try to prove that you can actually reverse positions and get on top. But yes, Jailton, Almeida, the side for both of us, more grappling upside against the wrestler at a pick'em price. My best bet, going with Michal, Oleksiejczuk, podcast favorite. Definitely cashed some tickets on Michal in the past against Michel Pereira, another podcast favorite. I think this is a bad matchup for Pereira, though. He does not like getting pressured. And typically, he's the hammer, not the nail. Here, he is very much the nail, especially early. Nobody pressures like Lord Michel. He's also looked incredibly powerful since moving down in weight. The pressure, the boxing, I think it's going to be really dangerous for Pereira early. He's going to get backed up against the fence. He's a guy who likes space. He likes to create chaos when he has that space. Even more so now in his career, he's become a less chaotic fighter. He does have the grappling upside here. I think he could potentially land a takedown and threaten some chokes. But Michal Oleksiejczuk, especially for the first round, is an absolute handful. Always like to bet his money line. Always like to sprinkle that round one prop, getting about plus 500 or better on this fight. Gotten as high as plus 900 in the past. Michal Oleksiejczuk on the money line has the striking advantage, should win the early minutes. And I think at this weight class, against this opponent, he actually has a fairly neutral cardio battle as well, and should be able to maintain it over the course of 15 minutes. So just think he has more ways to win. Pereira probably has to grapple successfully if he wants to break the pressure of win this fight. Billy, any thoughts on Oleksiejczuk against Pereira before we get out of here?
No, I like that. And one thing, you kind of alluded to it, but Oleksiejczuk, former light heavyweight, kind of struggled against the bigger, stronger guys there. Pedro, former welterweight, kind of struggled against the scales there. But I think a lot of his success was due to being so much bigger and stronger than his opponents in a way that's probably not going to be there now. So, yeah, it's great if you can grapple, but if you're all of a sudden facing someone stronger than you for the first time in your career and trying to wrestle him, maybe that doesn't work. So, like where you're coming from, you have sold me on it, even though it's not a bet I've made yet. So, I will be rushing to do that as soon as we get off this.
Yeah, I saw as high as plus 130. It did seem like it was coming down today, so probably going to jump on that at plus 130, projected it closer to plus 115. And that'll do it for us for the UFC 299 betting preview on the Action Network podcast, presented by BetMGM. Find more from Billy and myself on actionnetwork.com, and don't forget to download the free award-winning Action Network app. You can find all of our picks for this weekend logged in there. Best of luck with all of your bets this weekend, and see you next time on the Action Network podcast.